In the small village of Isolo, a place so intimately connected that familiar faces were abundant and private matters rarely remained concealed for long, resided two siblings, Adana and Chisholm. They were not individuals who garnered widespread admiration or popular acclaim within the community. Indeed, the majority of the inhabitants scarcely referred to them by their actual, given names, instead labeling them merely as those two unattractive girls, a designation that stuck to them like stubborn dust. Adana, the elder of the two sisters, possessed a tall and slender frame, her skin bearing the uneven, darkening marks acquired from countless hours spent beneath the relentless glare of the sun. Chisholm, her slightly shorter sister, had a nose that appeared somewhat flattened, teeth that were noticeably misaligned, and eyes that seemed unable to fixate in unison, each appearing to wander slightly independently of the other. The environment within the village proved harsh, particularly towards young women such as themselves, those who failed entirely to conform to the rigid, often unforgiving standards defining what was considered aesthetically pleasing or conventionally beautiful in Isolo. Youngsters would relentlessly ridicule them whenever they were seen, erupting in uncontrolled laughter and singling them out with pointing fingers and cruel taunts as they passed by. Older residents would deliberately give them a wide berth in the market square or on the dusty paths, creating an invisible barrier of avoidance, and prospective partners, young men of marrying age, wouldn't even venture remotely close to their modest family dwelling, acting as if proximity itself might somehow taint them. Yet, Adana and Chisholm were not individuals inclined to conceal themselves away from the world. Defiantly, they styled themselves the legendary sisters and traversed the lanes and paths of Isolo with a daring, almost provocative confidence that seemed to irritate and provoke annoyance in virtually all who observed their unconventional behavior. They applied generous, often heavy amounts of cosmetics, foundation markedly lighter than their actual skin complexions, vibrant red lipstick that frequently smudged messily at the edges of their mouths, and false eyelashes so thick and prominent they resembled a fixed plumage around their eyes. Their attire was intentionally gaudy and often boldly mismatched, colors clashing and patterns vying for attention, yet they wore it all with a conviction that bordered on outright defiance, a desperate attempt purely to feel a visible part of things and perhaps, just perhaps, for the villagers to acknowledge some form, any form, of beauty or noteworthy quality in them. But regardless of the layers of makeup they applied, the gaudy clothes they donned, or the air of confidence they projected, the villagers persisted stubbornly in seeing them as the most unsightly young women in the entire village. "Look at them," Mama Adiz would exclaim loudly, her voice dripping with scorn, as they went by, looking like ceremonial masks yet still moving with the bearing of queens. "Who do they think they are?" Adana and Chisholm seemed not to care in the slightest, or at least, they projected a meticulously maintained air of utter indifference to such remarks. They navigated the bustling market square as though they were the rightful princesses of the land, their heads held high, their steps deliberately unhurried. Adana and Chisholm were frequently perceived as disruptive figures, constantly inserting themselves into the affairs of others, participating loudly in conversations that did not concern them in the least, and engaging in arguments with anyone audacious enough to cast even the mildest aspersions their way. Their sharp tongues were their primary weapon. However, beneath the outward bravado, the layers of heavy makeup, and the sharp, often cutting retorts they aimed back at the world that wounded them, the sisters carried a quiet, profound sadness within their hearts. What the people of Isolo failed entirely to witness were the long, often tear-filled evenings they spent in their small, shared room, silently removing their cosmetics layer by painful layer, revealing the faces they tried so hard to hide. People did not see the way Chisholm would glance quickly at herself in the looking-glass only to swiftly avert her gaze as if the reflection were unbearable, or the countless times Adana would remain awake late into the night, feigning some trivial activity so that Chisholm would not overhear the quiet, heartbreaking sound of her weeping. They were not inherently troublesome or malicious individuals. They were simply two young women who had, through constant exposure to cruelty, learned to construct a robust defense mechanism forged entirely from attitude and a forced, outward resilience. Life in Isolo, with its relentless judgment, had never afforded them the luxury or the opportunity to be gentle with themselves or the world around them. Their mother, before her untimely passing, used to impart a cherished piece of wisdom, her voice soft yet firm. Beauty resides not in the countenance, my daughters, but within the heart where kindness and courage dwell. But the world, or at least their world in Isolo, perceived only the surface, judging them without compassion, without seeking to understand the pain that lay beneath their constructed facade. At times, the relentless verbal barbs hurled at them inflicted wounds far deeper than they ever allowed themselves to show. One particular day at the market, as they strolled with their conspicuous makeup and brightly colored garments that drew unwanted attention, they encountered a group of young women who immediately burst into peals of cruel laughter as they saw them approaching. Even malevolent spirits would be frightened of these ones. One of the maidens declared loudly, ensuring her voice carried, and they all laughed mockingly as they passed, mistakenly believing the sisters were out of earshot, too far away to hear their cutting words. But they heard. They always heard everything. The constant mockery, the disdain, the quiet whispers that followed them everywhere. They absorbed it all, day after day. Even the men of the village adamantly refused to consider marrying them, treating the very notion with derision. They would frequently sneer openly. Who in their right mind would take these ones as wives? They are a sight to make a man lose his appetite. Some others would remark with casual cruelty, even if they were given away for free, with a dowry attached, no one would accept them. Despite this incessant barrage of negativity, they continued to appear publicly, loud, outwardly self-assured, and seemingly unrepentant in their chosen style. Yet, the emotional burden of carrying this defiance grew increasingly heavy with each passing day. One evening, after a particularly cruel and exhausting day filled with clandestine laughter and malicious whispers that trailed them like persistent shadows through the village, the sisters sat outside beneath the ancient, sprawling Irako tree behind their small home. "I am making an effort, Adana," Chisholm whispered, her voice barely audible above the chirping crickets, fragile with unshed tears. "But I am truly uncertain if I can sustain this way of living any longer. The weight is too much." Adana did not immediately respond. She gazed silently into the night sky above, where tiny fireflies danced like fleeting stars in the distance, her own heart heavy. "I understand," she finally replied, her voice equally soft. "As do I. The pretending, it wears us down." And it was then, in the quiet darkness beneath the old tree, that they resolved to undertake something fundamentally different, something unexpected, something that deviated sharply from the ordinary, painful path their lives had taken thus far. They weren't entirely sure precisely what that something would be, but they knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were utterly weary of pretending to be unaffected, tired to their very souls of striving for acceptance from a village that refused to grant it, and completely exhausted by wearing a mask of defiance that felt heavier with each passing moment. Everywhere Adana and Chisholm went from that point forward, it seemed the laughter intensified, the whispers grew bolder and more hurtful, no longer even attempting to be hidden. Even the youngsters who had once fled in mock terror at the sight of the legendary sisters now congregated openly at street corners, singing cruel, improvised chants designed to wound. Adana and Chisholm, two market witches, one face twisted, one face scarred. Ah, who will ever marry them? No one. No one. Some women, witnessing this, would laugh until tears streamed down their faces, finding endless amusement in the sisters' pain. Even at the significant gathering of village women, during announcements and important discussions, when Adana once bravely rose to offer a contribution or an opinion on a community matter, someone from the rear muttered audibly, loud enough for many to hear, "Please, let her be seated. We are discussing grace and beauty, not grotesqueness, and an affront to the eyes." That remark, delivered so casually yet publicly, pierced deeply into Adana's already bruised spirit. At home, they had only each other for solace and understanding. The effect of this constant barrage began to show. Adana ceased wearing her elaborate makeup for a few days, leaving her face bare and vulnerable, and Chisholm spoke very little, retreating into herself. Their dwelling, which had once echoed with loud, exaggerated disagreements and boisterous, often defiant salutations, fell into an uncharacteristic silence. They avoided the market entirely. They stopped walking to the village well at their customary time, preferring to risk thirst or draw water at less busy hours. They remained indoors, waiting desperately for the hurtful noise to subside, for the village to forget them momentarily, but it did not. The judgment was a constant, oppressive presence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the gentle hills surrounding Isolo, casting long, fading shadows, Adana stood before the small, damaged mirror hanging precariously on their clay wall, examining her own reflection with a rare, unguarded look. "Chisholm," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you truly believe our mother was right?" "Right about what, Adana?" Chisholm mumbled from the corner where she sat hunched, peeling sweet potato without any real interest, her gaze distant. "That beauty," Adana continued, turning slightly, "resides not in the countenance, but within the heart." Chisholm looked up then, her eyes brimming visibly with sorrow and a deep weariness. "Our hearts, they are pure, Adana, or at least we try to keep them so," she replied, her voice filled with an aching pain. "But what good does that do us here? The people here don't look at hearts, they only see faces. And they do not like what they see." They sat in silence for a long, heavy while, the only sounds the crackle of the small fire and the distant calls of night birds, until Adana spoke again, a new resolve hardening her voice. "We cannot continue living like this," she declared, straightening her shoulders. "If the world refuses to see our hearts, then we must discover a way, any way, to alter our narrative. We need a solution that changes things fundamentally." Chisholm's voice trembled with a mixture of fear and faint hope. "Do you wish for us to alter our appearance somehow? Or should we simply flee this place?" "Neither," Adana stated firmly, her gaze fixed on a point beyond the small room. "We will seek assistance. Genuine help. Perhaps it is spiritual in nature. Perhaps it is something else entirely, something tangible we have not considered. But I am certain there is something out there for us, a different path we haven't found yet." The following day, before the first light had fully broken over the horizon, the sisters prepared a modest satchel containing only their essential belongings, 2 simple wrappers to change into, their mother's aged and well-worn Bible for comfort and guidance, and a small container of palm oil for their skin and cooking. They covered their heads with cloths to obscure their faces slightly and departed at daybreak, moving swiftly and silently before any villager could witness their leaving and question their destination. Their intended destination was Iluor, a quiet, distant settlement renowned in local lore for 2 things: its mystical river and an elderly woman who is said to possess the extraordinary ability to perceive the very essence of a person, seeing beyond the physical shell. Some called her a seer, claiming she could glimpse the future or hidden truths. Others, more cynical, dismissed her as merely a madwoman dwelling on the fringes of reality. Yet, all agreed on one undisputed fact: she had once miraculously aided a man with a severely deformed leg to walk normally again after years of crippling disability. And if she could achieve such a remarkable feat, perhaps, just perhaps, she possessed the power or the wisdom to offer them aid as well, to change their perception or the way the world perceived them. Their journey was extensive and arduous. They trekked along dense forest paths barely wide enough for one person, forded small, cool streams, and slept on hard bamboo benches within the compounds of strangers who sometimes offered hesitant shelter. They endured stares filled with suspicion, direct insults hurled from passers-by, and even unexpected acts of simple kindness that startled them with their rarity. But they pressed onward relentlessly, their feet aching and their spirits weary, not necessarily because they anticipated a miraculous, instantaneous intervention, but because they were utterly desperate. Desperate to be truly seen for who they were inside, desperate to belong somewhere, anywhere, and most of all, desperate to no longer be defined and labeled solely as the unattractive girls of Isolo. As they neared the narrow, winding track leading towards the settlement of Ilior, the wind whispered softly through the ancient trees as if acknowledging the arrival of the long-suffering legendary sisters. They were unsure of what they would encounter at the end of their journey, what wisdom or disappointment awaited them, but they had already made the single most pivotal decision of their existence: to cease merely enduring the pain of their lives and to commence actively transforming their circumstances. The journey to Ilior had spanned 2 full, exhausting days of constant walking. Their footwear was worn thin, offering little protection, their feet covered in painful blisters and thick layers of dust. Nevertheless, Adana and Chisholm did not halt until they reached the periphery of the village, where the trees grew taller and older, and the air felt peculiar, heavy, as though it held ancient secrets and unspoken truths. They located the old woman's dwelling exactly as it had been described by those who knew of her, a circular mud house adorned with distinctive white markings decorating the outer walls, and dried medicinal plants suspended from the ceiling like dormant bats within. Smoke curled gently upwards from a small, central fire burning steadily in the middle of the single room. And there she sat, stooped significantly with age, her skin etched with countless deep wrinkles like the rough rind of an ancient fruit, yet her eyes were startlingly sharp, clear, and penetrating, seeming to look right through them. She looked up as they approached her dwelling, and before they could utter a single word of greeting or explanation, she said softly, her voice raspy but kind, "I've been expecting you, daughters." Adana and Chisholm exchanged swift, bewildered glances, completely taken aback by her words. The old woman did not request an explanation for their visit, did not pry into their reasons for seeking her out. She simply welcomed them inside her humble home, provided cool water for them to drink to quench their thirst, and offered them roasted yams served simply with palm oil, insisting they eat and rest before speaking. When they eventually spoke, pouring out their anguish, their humiliation, the constant pain of their existence, and their fervent, desperate desire for change, for release from their suffering, she listened in complete silence, her gaze steady, devoid of any judgment or apparent surprise, only a profound stillness and understanding. "I comprehend your suffering, my daughters," she articulated finally, her voice gentle yet firm, resonating with ancient wisdom. "But the world's cruelty does not, and cannot, determine your intrinsic value as human beings. You have come to me seeking transformation, seeking to change yourselves or the world's perception of you. Yet, I advise you now, with all the sincerity I possess, return to Isolo. Accept yourselves fully, with all your perceived flaws and inner strengths. Something significant, something truly important, awaits you both there in Isolo. Your future, the path you are meant to walk, is intrinsically linked to that village, despite the pain it has caused you. Do not jeopardize it by pursuing the wrong kind of alteration, the kind that seeks external validation over internal peace." Chisholm furrowed her brow in confusion and frustration, unable to grasp her meaning. "But mother," she pleaded, using the respectful address, "we are weary. So incredibly weary. Weary of pretending to be strong. Weary of struggling against a tide of hate. Weary of being mocked and scorned at every turn. We cannot simply go back to that." The old woman smiled sadly, understanding the depth of their exhaustion. "I know, my daughter. The burdens you carry are heavy, but not every struggle is to be met with force or immediate escape. Some require patience, profound faith in yourselves, and quiet discernment to understand the path laid before you." Adana slowly rose to her feet, a mixture of disappointment and a lingering, desperate hope in her eyes. "So," she said, her voice hollow with dashed expectations, "you will not help us? You cannot give us something that changes things." "I already have," the woman responded, her sharp eyes holding Adana's gaze steadily, "by speaking the truth to you as I perceive it, the truth you needed to hear, not necessarily the truth you wanted." With hearts heavier than when they had arrived, the sisters departed the following morning at dawn. They walked in silence, each step feeling heavier than the last, burdened by the old woman's words and the apparent futility of their journey. The path back to Isolo felt somehow colder and longer than the journey out. The sky above them appeared duller, mirroring their spirits. There was no sense of anticipation in their return, only confusion, deep frustration, and crushing disappointment. And when they finally glimpsed the familiar clay rooftops of their village once more, a sense of resignation, tinged with bitterness, twisted within them. The market's clamor returned as they entered, the familiar sounds of life and, for them, judgment. The insults returned, perhaps even more cutting after their brief absence. Nothing, absolutely nothing, had changed in Isolo. So, standing there on the edge of the village that rejected them, they reached a new, defiant resolution. They would not heed the old woman's counsel to simply return and endure. They would forge their own destiny, find their own solution, with or without her assistance or blessing. That evening, Adana and Chisholm sat together in the small, familiar confines of their room, contemplating their next, uncertain course of action. The air was thick with unspoken pain and simmering resentment. "We will become something more than this village can possibly tolerate," Adana declared, her eyes, despite the weariness, alight with a new, fierce determination. "If they will not accept us as we are, then they will be forced to witness our ascent to something they cannot ignore or dismiss." From that day forward, the legendary sisters began quietly devising a scheme. A plan that they believed would send tremors through the very foundations of Isolo, forcing its inhabitants to look at them differently. A plan that, though undeniably born from deep pain, relentless humiliation, and a desperate need for validation, would hopefully yield something unforgettable, something powerful. That night, as thunder rumbled ominously in the distance and rain gently tapped a steady rhythm on their corrugated iron roof, Chisholm sat wrapped in their mother's old, comforting cloth, her gaze distant and thoughtful, lost in memory. "Adana," she said quietly, her voice hesitant, breaking the silence, "do you remember that story Mother used to recount to us about the River of Beauty?" Adana turned slowly from the small charcoal fire they used for warmth and cooking. Her interest peaked. The one she claimed was hidden deep within the heart of the forest, so secret that only the truly pure of heart could find it, where people would look into the water and emerge, transformed. Chisholm nodded slowly, her eyes now fixed on Adana's face. "Yes, that one. She used to say that true beauty emanates from within, that the heart is the real source, but sometimes, even nature lends a helping hand to reveal it. I always thought it was merely a tale for bedtime, a comforting story to make us feel better. But what if it wasn't? What if it was real?" Adana's eyes narrowed slightly, a fragile flicker of desperate hope igniting in her chest, pushing back against the darkness of despair. "You believe it's real? That such a river actually exists?" Chisholm sat up straighter, her voice gaining a touch of conviction. "I don't know if it's real, not for certain. But Mother wasn't one to deceive us, not about important things. And she always maintained that the river would not work for those with cruel or wicked hearts, that it merely mirrored and amplified what lay inside you, revealing your true self, whatever that might be." A heavy silence settled between them once more, filled only by the sound of the rain. Then Adana stood decisively, unwrapping herself from the cloth, her movements filled with a sudden, fierce resolve. "Then we will find it," she declared, her voice strong and unwavering. "If it exists anywhere in this world, we will find it. Whether it means traversing the deepest, darkest forests, crossing countless swift streams, sleeping beneath the open sky with nothing but the trees for shelter, I do not care. We are not staying here in Isolo to wither away in shame and scorn, waiting for acceptance that will never come." The following morning, before the sun had fully ascended and cast its revealing light upon the village, they packed their meager belongings once more. This time, they informed no one of their intentions, not even their notoriously inquisitive neighbor, Mama Nkechi, who perpetually peered through her window like a watchful lizard, missing nothing. They followed the ancient forest path their mother had spoken of in her stories, the one she described as leading beyond the nearest hills, past the old mango grove bordering the village stream, and deep into the wilderness. For days, They walked without rest, driven by a singular purpose. With each weary stride, the whispers of their mother's voice echoed like a mantra in their minds. The river of beauty reveals your true self, but only those who walk the path with suffering and sincerity will ever discover it. And so, with aching feet, blistered heels, and calloused hands, Adana and Chisholm pressed onward through sudden downpours and periods of blistering heat, propelled solely by the vision of standing before that fabled river, a river that could finally, perhaps, reflect the individuals they were on the inside, strong, compassionate despite the cruelty they faced, courageous in the face of adversity. They did not know its precise location in the vast forest, nor were they entirely certain of its actual existence beyond their mother's tales. But hope was a potent force, especially for those with nothing else left to cling to, and the legendary sisters possessed just enough of it left to believe in the possibility of finding what they sought. They were resolute in their quest, for if the world, if their own village, persistently refused to see their inherent worth and beauty, then they would journey to the furthest reaches of the earth to reveal it, not to others, but finally, truly, to themselves. Weeks passed in Isolo, then quiet months, turning into seasons. The village fell silent in a manner it never had before, missing the familiar, if disruptive, presence of the two sisters. Initially, when their absence was noted, the villagers simply laughed, some with relief, others with cruel amusement. Those unattractive girls have run off again. Good riddance. Perhaps they are seeking another village to disrupt with their antics, some joked openly in the market square. But as the days turned into months, and the air in the market remained unusually still without the sharp voices of Adana and Chisholm instigating drama, injecting themselves into disputes, or drawing attention with their appearance, the laughter gradually faded. No one received any news of them from travelers or neighboring villages. Adana and Chisholm never came back to Isolo, and nothing more was ever heard of the legendary sisters, swallowed by the forest and their desperate, hopeful quest for a beauty the world refused to see.